pretending to talk to Rob Guillory here. And,
your imaginary
yeah,
friend.
yeah. So, how'd you come up with the distinctive style that you have for the characters' bodies and the it's like realistic, but also kind of almost a satire.
Yeah, well, stylistically, it's kind of just I had developed this style before I ever started Chew.
Oh, okay.
And it was just basically an amalgam of a bunch of different things that I like. Like I grew up on Marvel Comics, and I figured that's probably how I wanted to draw, except I'm not good at drawing that way. So like for years, I would try to draw the Marvel way, and I sucked at it.
Yeah.
I just didn't fit. I mean, it's awful. So basically, at some point, I realized I discovered independent comics, and I realized that there was an entirely other way to draw comics that seemed like more fun, that it seemed like way more in line with my sensibilities. Because I grew up with not just Marvel and DC, but Warner Brothers and more like Hanna-Barbera, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I started kind of like approaching it that way, and kind of built up a style from ground level of just basic, simple shapes, simple expression, that kind of thing. And it eventually kind of morphed and kind of became weirder and, graffiti inspired and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So by the time Chew came around, I actually was banging around the independent scene looking for the right gig and not really finding much.
Right.
Because, publishers weren't exactly sure that, fans would buy a book drawn this way.
Right.
So whenever John found me, I was actually really struggling. So when he found me, he was like, well, I want you to draw this way. And I didn't believe it because at that point, no one had wanted me to draw that way at all. Yeah. But it just so happened to be the perfect fit. So yeah, it just fit perfectly together.
Yeah, I think it works well in a way that the characters look realistic enough. It's not like a normal webcomic type of look, but like you're able to exaggerate for a lot of feeling. Like when Mason comes into the room, you feel like he's a fridge. He's like the only real other way you see that is maybe like Wilson Fisk in Marvel is drawn that way.
Yeah, I mean he really is. Yeah, I mean it's a perfect analogy. I mean what's funny is like in the initial sketches, which are in the back of the trades and the hardcovers, he wasn't that big. Right. He got bigger over time. Like I mean I really didn't know how much I can get away with because Chew. Like I said, self-esteem wise, I didn't know how much I can get away with. So if you read the book from issue 1 on, I was gaining my confidence and was seeing that, okay, it's okay for me to push the boundaries in terms of humor, in terms of like absurdity, to the point where I could make Mason Savoy, twice as big as everybody else in the room, and it's completely believable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So John was telling me that you were the first person that came up with all the background Easter eggs.
Yeah.
What was the thought process on that?
Well, I didn't know how much I can get away with because I didn't know John before this project. And more as I did it, I would sneak in little things. Like the first 2 issues, little background things. And by issue 3, we started getting fan mail and people saying like, oh, I saw that thing you did in the background or whatever. And I thought, oh, wow, like people actually like it. And he didn't seem to mind. So I started just kind of throwing it in more and more to where like it became a real thing and people look for it. And the thing is, like I got it from Watchmen was really where I got it from. Because I used to keep a copy of Watchmen on my coffee table. Yeah. And I would just flip through it every now and again. And every time I did, I saw some new things in the background I had never seen before. Yeah. And it just seemed like a really great way to kind of give people their money's worth over and over and over again to the point where, it's a completely new experience every time you read it. So, I mean, most people, when they read it, they seem to read it more than once. They read it once to just get the story aspect, and then they go back to kind of absorb the art, which is like, it enriches the world and adds a new dimension to it. That's not completely like, you don't have to know everything that's in the background to understand the story. Right. But if you really want to get, like, the entire experience, then you may want to go back and see that stuff. So that's kind of the approach.
Well, what's really interesting about it is, so you took that from Watchmen, which is, Alan Moore's using that to really give you all these different layers. He's got the comic book within the comic book and all that stuff. But when you're using it, it's kind of giving it like an extra believability to the to the business dimension. I was telling John that I have a day job and the memos and stuff that you have on there are really close to what I actually see, and that's really scary, and that really makes it feel more like a lived-in world as opposed to just these drawn characters,
Well, yeah, I mean, before I became a full-time comic artist, I mean, I worked at Office Depot. I mean, like, we went through all this stuff. Like, I remember we would have staff meetings, and it was always, like, these stupid, like, diversity meetings and things like that. And, they would have calendars with stupid sayings like, excitement.
Yeah.
And they were just completely ridiculous.
Yeah.
And I just thought, the FDA, I just pictured them as being this really, monotonous, completely bureaucratic organization that was totally soul-sucking. So every time you see it in the background when they're in the offices, you just see all these stupid, TPS reports.
Right,
and,
right.
It's completely, little things.
One final question, and if you don't feel comfortable, that's fine. I was just curious. As a person of color, that's very rare in this industry. It's a little bit less rare in the Maryland, D.C. area, but in general, it's pretty rare. Do you see more people coming into Tube because they know who you are, or they look you up, or anything like that? Do you see anything, or is it kind of completely separate from?
Well, I think people probably find out about my race after the fact, and I think I like it better that way. I'm good either way. I've been approached. There's a lot of young and up-and-coming, creators of color that, kind of approach me and say, it's really cool that you're doing this, and I see, these things are possible because you've done it, and if you've done it, drawing the way that you draw, then, I can probably do it, doing the thing that I do.
Right.
But I think that I don't want to be a guy that, is ever hired because I'm a certain color.
Yeah.
I kind of want to just get the gig because I'm the best guy for the gig.
Yeah.
But I'm good either way. I'm good with, I'm really, really excited about kind of being that kind of inspiration to young up and coming people.
Yeah.
So, it's cool.
I think that's a great thing. If you look around, there's just on walking the show floor, there's just not as many people of color, whether that's black or Hispanic or Asian. There's a few, but there's not really as many. So I think the more people can see that it's possible. It's almost a ridiculous comparison, but like an Obama type thing. Now people can say, hey, he's done it. I could potentially do it. Whereas before we're like, hey, we've been for 200 years. Right. What's the odds?
Right. And I think that the biggest thing I harp on with anyone trying to break into this, any minority, person of color trying to break into this, whatever, is, don't ever think that you can't do this because someone told you can't do it. I had people, before I broke into this industry, and I haven't talked about it much, but that told me you can't do this because you're not the right color for that. Right. And I completely was, thank God, I was young and rebellious enough that I was just was well, screw you, I'm doing this. Yeah. And I did it. Yeah. So I think that's my biggest thing to tell people is if you really feel called to this, then you need to do it. Yeah. And don't let anyone tell you can't. Yeah. So yeah,
and I think the important thing, like you mentioned right when we first started this interview, is you had a lot of rejection, and it was because of the way you were drawing was not the house style. It's not because almost your name's not historically black name or anything, right? So it's a hard thing to break into. So people need to know, don't take that personally. Just keep going. Right. And now that we have the indie scene so strong, you can break through.
Right. And I think that I think from my experience, honestly, I think people care more about good work and making money in this industry than they do about color necessarily. Because I think that I don't see any publishers turning down if you're fantastic at what you do. Yeah. I don't see you getting turned down because you're the wrong color. Right. If anything, most of the people I've dealt with had no idea who I was because most of this is done via email and whatever. Right. I think that just do your thing, be the best you can be. Yeah. And it'll happen. It'll take time, and you'll get rejection like everyone else does. I got tons of it. Right. I still have I still have hurdles I have to get over, even as an award-winning, fairly successful creator. Right. It's just part of it. Just take it in stride and keep going. That's all you can do.
Thank you so much. This has been a huge, awesome geek out for me. Thank you so much for taking the time.
No, thanks for having me.
Thanks. Thank you.